Can you see my slides?
Yep, we can see them.
Perfect. Okay. Well, as Tom introduced myself and Christy, we both are working with NRCS. I'm going to cover a little bit about EQIP and CSP, which are cost share programs. And then Christy's going to go into some other details about another program that is available through PL 566. Okay. So what we wanted to visit with you today is just to kind of explain what is available to a producer in the state of North Dakota. So what kind of assistance can we provide to an irrigator? As always, we'd like to pride ourselves in being a technical agency, so we can always provide technical assistance to an irrigator. And if possible, we'll work with you on financial assistance. We have several programs that are available to use to get financial assistance. They would be our EQIP program or our Environmental Quality Incentive Program, our CSP program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, the RCPP Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and then Christy will talk about PL 566. I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about EQIP. That's primarily where we have cost shared irrigation projects in the past. So we'll talk a little bit about potential funding available. That would be through our local work group. And in the past, we had a statewide irrigation funding pool. And we may hopefully switch to more of a priority project request for this year, and I'll explain that. And through the CSP program, we've primarily been having producers utilize cost share for irrigation water management. So just the management of their existing system. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what it entails. Okay, so what is eligible for EQIP? First of all, we want to see a resource concern or a conservation benefit. So that might be improvements to water quantity, like water savings is typically what we want to see. Water quality, we've been using that resource concern definitely in variable rate irrigation. And we also, there's other erosion benefits along with implementing other practices too. So we'll work with you and see if there's a resource concern and if we can improve upon that. We also would require that the field has been irrigated 2 out of the last 5 years. I know I get questions on producers wanting to develop irrigation, and that's not something that the EQIP program is around for. We want to improve what's out there. So, and we also can't just do maintenance. So if you just need to replace part of your system because it's old, that's not something that we'll do. We need to have a concern, a resource concern, and show some water savings or water quality improvement. And as I touched on, we wouldn't be irrigating new land. All right, who can apply for EQIP? Well, an individual producer can apply for EQIP through their local office. We also have now the ability to have groups such as the irrigation districts that could apply for EQIP. And we did present this to the Irrigation Association at one of the monthly meetings in the past. And we're definitely willing to go down this path. We haven't had any requests yet, but that's something we can do. And our farm bill allows up to $450,000 in a contract. In the past, we had some caps over the years, and that's changed. So we have the ability to have more money in an EQIP contract if the project warrants it at this time. So we have a few changes in EQIP this year. In the past, historically, North Dakota has had what we call a separate funding pool or separate pool of money for an irrigator that would come in and apply for EQIP. They would then compete against similar irrigation projects throughout the state and determine, what would get funded based on their site conditions and what they're going to do. In 2021, which would be this next batching for EQIP, the state of North Dakota has changed they're trying to decrease their funding pools just to simplify things for one thing. And we're also kind of looking to see if there's any innovation out there and things like that. So they've developed what's going to be called priority projects, where groups like the Irrigation Association or a local work group or a soil conservation district could apply for or request money to target something specific. So there's a possibility that I think the Irrigation Association, and Christy and I are assisting them, will potentially ask for money through this special project that would be similar to what we've done in the past for the irrigation funding pool. Our sign up for this year, you would have had to actually sign an application by October 23rd of 2020, and we would be working with you on planning now. And then we would find out by like April 2nd if these projects were funded. So we have a list of applicants already, and I'll talk about that later. Okay, we'll get into some of the details on what type of projects we've worked on in the past and can in the future. So what will cost share? We will cost share improvements from any type of flood system or gated pipe, that type of thing, to convert to pivots. We will cost share and work with you on variable rate irrigation, VRI. We've done high to low pressure conversions for years where there's high impacts on top and converting to low pressure. Absolutely work with you on irrigation water management. As Dean mentioned, we really want to learn more about what is out there and all the great technology that can be utilized for this. And then we also have the opportunity to help you with energy improvements on pumping plants and variable frequency drives. And we've done that on a few irrigation projects in the state. So I'll get into the details of these and talk a little bit more about them. If you were a producer that had a flood to pivot conversion, there's a few things that we would look at first. That we would definitely look at the soil's irrigability and we would evaluate it. And that's based on a great publication that we worked with NDSU on, AE 1637. And if there's conditional soils that are present, we would have to do a little bit more of an in-depth analysis to determine what the restrictions might be and if it's a possibility to move ahead. We don't want to make anything worse by switching the system, and we just want to analyze it. Another potential limitation we have is that the acreage that's currently irrigated is eligible to be irrigated under the pivot. We have a little bit of flexibility, but not a lot on this. So basically it's a similar footprint. We wouldn't be adding extra land that wasn't irrigated, or very little. And we do have to, we'll calculate what the water savings is from the existing system, whatever it might be, to what the new system is, to show a change in water quantity. And hopefully we'll improve a few other things too. So what are some of the things we'd cost share in these situations? Well, the conveyance system improvements, new pivot, pumps, irrigation water management. Okay. Some typical conveyance system improvements that we would work on, and those could potentially just be projects if we had water savings and a resource concern. But you could go from gated pipe to pivot, ditch to pipe, field ditch to canal lining, siphon tubes. So there's a lot of options on improving your conveyance system. And this would be definitely more in the central western part of the state. Okay, we'll discuss a little bit about variable rate irrigation, and this happens to be the field that I've worked the most in of recent years. We started in 2015. We had a lot of requests coming from the southeastern part of the state and even parts of the central part of the state, and even spilled into the northeast, so we were pretty lucky. But we had a lot of interest from producers in wanting to pursue variable rate irrigation. And this was already talked about a little bit by Dean, but the top shows maybe you had variation in soils or topography or just the conditions of your field that warranted, you know, you may have a big wet area that you don't want to continue to put water on. And that was how some of this was initiated. So the top left shows you a situation where you have variation. The bottom left photo shows you what a typical pivot rate control is. And we wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to take it all the way to the picture on the right, which would be full VRI control, which would be to be able to, like Dean said, to control the flow coming out of the nozzle at either each nozzle or in a bank, which would be several of them together with a similar flow rate. But it still narrows down that area where you can control the flow rate and hopefully fertigation, chemigation. Okay, so if we were to work with you on VRI, we have a few things that come into play. We've, over the past few years, since 2015, have figured out that we want to show that there's like 15% of different field conditions. They may be soils, they may be topography, That might be non-farmed areas that are continually wet, that can cause a significant over or under application. So we would look at that, make sure that there's enough change in the field to warrant moving ahead. So the components that we are able to work with you on for cost share would be valve control on the pivots, which I've got the picture on the right shows it's a close-up view of the valve control on top of the pivot. That is the solenoid that toggles it on and off that controls the flow. So we would do that part. That would include the GPS components, the control panel, and the software and everything within it to define the zone control. We would also re-nozzle this pivot if it is greater than 10 years old. You know, the research out there shows that, you know, after about 7 years, your regulators and your nozzles have enough wear on them that it affects the application. So we really want to start with a good system and then add VRI to it. So that's why we would cost share that. Or also if your coefficient of application is 90 or less. So we'll help you figure that out. And then if a variable frequency drive is needed on the pump, if you're varying the flow enough that we can show that there's enough energy savings, that's another component that we would be able to assist with. So there is no longer a contract cap, like I mentioned. So the Farm Bill cap applies of $450,000 on these contracts. Okay, high to low pressure conversions are another potential to be cost shared through EQIP. This basically consists of the new nozzle drops. So on the right, that would be, you know, regulator up here, then your drops, and everything from the top down. So that would, if they had impacts on the top, high pressure impacts on the top, we would then put drops and nozzles and regulators on it. And if we would also see if there's any pump work that needed, whether like your impellers needed to be trimmed on your turbine or things needed to be done if the pressure changed enough to warrant it. And then we would work with you on an irrigation water management plan. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about irrigation water management. This is you know, it's like NRCS is definitely willing to work with you on the structural component, but then we want to continue that a little further and work with you on the management side. You know, when you make a change in your system, it'll also change on how you operate it, how you apply your water, and it'll affect all of those components in your watering. So we'll develop what's called an irrigation water management plan, IWM plan, and we would like to. We have several levels, but we've been working a lot on the advanced side of it. So using all the technology that is out there. Dean alluded to the fact that there's lots of choices, and I'll cover a little bit of that. The pictures I've got here, just to show you a little bit, on the left-hand side is just a solar panel that operates this particular probe, and there's a box on the back side with all the controls in it, and the wires run down to the probe that is in the ground. I have a picture of just an example of one soil probe. I have several others in here too, but in the center, that is just I think an AquaSpire AquaCheck, I don't remember. And then over on the top right is an example of the watermark sensors installed and the cords running back to the control. And then the bottom right is a flow meter. So I'll talk about some of these components. They all play a role in our irrigation water management. The keys to this is that we would like a flow meter installed, and we'll cost share that. And that would be to monitor your flows on a daily basis. We want these flow meters to have telemetry and to be able to record your data, and you could look at it daily. So if your pivot is running, then you'd know it is because you can see the numbers increasing. And at the end of the season, it would have all the data logged, and we can go back and look at it. And the soil moisture probes that we're looking for, we want them to have telemetry, just like the soil probe, so that they're logging their data. You can use an app or your computer to look at what is going on every day and make decisions on your water application rates. And the sensors that are in the probe, there's so many choices out there, but we've basically come up with like the minimum depth we want based on the crop. Dean kind of alluded to that box he was talking about with the soil moisture capacity and the root zone. So we want these to be either 36 or 48 inches deep, depending on the crop. And we want to be able to see the sensors every, 6 inches or so that you can, if they have multiple sensors. And we want to be able to see what's going on at different depths in the profile. So we specify that just the basics, like a capacitance one with telemetry and a depth. And then we'll let you pick what kind of sensor you want. And as we mentioned, there's a lot of choices. The Watermark, the AquaSpy, Centec, CropX. We're starting to see different ones, and they provide different data to us. This is just another slide that shows you another type of sensor. This happens to be the CropX sensor, and this one has a battery, so it doesn't require a little solar panel out there. You still want to obviously put a big flag out there so you can find it in the crop. And then the other three displays on this just show you examples of screens that you might have on your cell phone and your app or on your computer that would give you your daily readings, so you can kind of determine what is going on in your soil profile. So when we're working with producers on variable rate irrigation, they're trying to take this data from their subscribe service they're using for their soil probes, and then they're trying to make decisions on how to adjust their prescriptions and when to water and when not to water. So some of them have started to utilize the services that are available out there from these different manufacturers, and Dean talked about them too, but like Valley has a scheduling service, FieldNet Advisor does. He alluded to the fact that people are using drones, planes, satellite imagery. They're using infrared and thermal imagery to show water stress, and they want to use all this data, hopefully along with the soil probe data, to make some decisions about their field. So we found there's just such a variety out there, and that's one of the reasons why we recruited Dean to help us do some research and see what is out there, what's some of the best choices for these producers and what their capabilities are. We've been analyzing irrigation water management since probably 2016. We've seen lots of different submissions, and our goal is to help them producer determine at the end of the year if he watered appropriately, whether if he underwatered or overwatered, timing of it, that type of thing, and if he utilized all the tools that he had in his pocket per se. So we're hoping to learn a little bit more about what's out there and what are some of the best choices. So we appreciate all these producers taking the time to try new things, and we're hoping that Dean can help us kind of finalize all this and get some more information. So we appreciate the help. So that's what we're doing on irrigation water management. We would ask them to keep the records for the entire year, then submit them at the end of the year. Then we'd sit down and have a discussion on how to go. What would you change? What are you going to do next year? That type of thing. And we pay for just a flat rate on that. And what it is we're hoping that you can get your equipment needed, pay the subscription fee, and then your management and your time. We're hoping that cost is covered in all of it. Okay, then the other thing that is available through EQIP is the energy program, which is a nationally funded pool. And this would be targeted towards irrigation people that have pumps and VFD requests. So if they wanted to change their pumps, improve on their efficiency, the goal of this is that it's not maintenance, but we'd have to go through you'd have to pay for an energy audit first, or we can help you with that also. And they would evaluate it and figure out what the before situation is and what the after situation is, and if there's warrants enough energy savings to make an upgrade to the system. That would be what we'd be looking for in the irrigation situation. There is other opportunities to use the energy program for heating, ventilation, lighting systems, and building envelopes, but they're only for barns in North Dakota. So that's an option, but you'd still have to pursue the energy audit first. So we're looking to just improve on your efficiency, and that's what would happen. We also would work with you on your screens, on the intakes of it, make sure you have the proper fish screen to meet all the requirements that exist through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, that stuff. So those are all also available to a producer. So if you have interest in any of these things I've covered, that would be just walk into the local county office and ask them about EQIP, and they would contact their local engineer, whoever covers the area, and we would start working with you. So in the past, EQIP has cost shared, like I said, irrigation really since 2004, but I just captured some data from 2014 to 2020 to show you, and also to help the Irrigation Association with their application. But we've done the vast majority of the money that we spent, close to $4 million since 2014, was on flood to pivot conversions. Next in line would be, 1.6 million on VRI. And then we've got irrigation water management contracts through EQIP. And this doesn't even include all the irrigation water management through CSP. And also just renozzling, and then a few micro irrigation systems. So we've been lucky enough to have this much funding available and work on a vast array of projects through the state of North Dakota. Okay, so as I kind of alluded to earlier, the North Dakota Irrigation Association is going to hopefully apply for a special priority funding that would target the irrigation projects throughout the state. So currently, we've gathered 15 applications for 18 pivots. They are mainly flood to pivot conversions and renozzling. We actually don't have any VRI applications this year, which is an oddity since 2015, but I think that'll come back. So we do have interest, as we have in the past. This is normal or maybe a little bit low for what we've seen in the last few years. So we'll work with the Irrigation Association and hope that we can secure funding specifically for this. And if not, these projects can apply through their local work group, which means they would compete within the 4 quadrants of the state. We have the pool of money set up for 4 parts of the state, and they would compete in that category as another option for funding for these projects. So that's kind of what the goal is going to be, and hopefully everything will work out pretty good on requesting funding. So, okay, that is everything I had for EQIP, and as I didn't spend a lot of time on CSP, but it's basically the irrigation water component, just like I covered, with the exception that you might need a weather station. But so CSP is an option too if you're working with your county office. So, all right, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Christy, and I will be clicking. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, that was a really great explanation of what NRCS can do in terms of working with individual irrigators. But in the event there's an ambitious group of people in North Dakota that's interested in developing new irrigation or tackling bigger projects, I just wanted to introduce the concept of our PL 566 small watershed planning process. And that is not to an individual irrigator, it's to a unit of local government. So it could be an irrigation district, a water resource district, a soil conservation district, a tribe, or some other entity like that. In the past, PL 566 watershed planning in North Dakota has really just been targeted to flood control projects. And if you can see these small dots on the map, these are all dams that were constructed for flood control across the state through the PL 566 program in the past. Okay. But PL 566 can actually do more than just flood prevention projects. So along with flood prevention, it can tackle watershed protection, say reducing erosion. It can simply be targeted to improving public recreation or fish and wildlife. It can be used for agricultural water management. So that could be a drainage project, it could be an irrigation project, or it could be a combination of both. It can be used for municipal or industrial water supplies in rural areas, or it can be used for water quality, or it was often the case, it's used for a combination of these benefits. Okay. So I'll give you an irrigation example. We have not done one of these in North Dakota. Here's an example from not too long ago from central Arkansas. They were facing an issue with declining groundwater aquifers, which posed a risk to almost 300,000 acres of irrigated cropland, as well as municipal and industrial water users of these aquifers. So they started on a PL 566 planning process and looked at a lot of alternatives and ended up deciding that the best alternative for them was to convert some of that irrigation to surface water sources. So their PL 566 project involved constructing canals and pump stations, regulating reservoirs, pipelines to all of the on-farm irrigation, and then converting from flood to sprinkler on a lot of those farms. These projects are big. This one, for example, had $535 million of federal funds into that. And that represented 90 to 100% of the engineering costs for this massive project, 50 to 75% of the construction costs, and really what the local entities are always on the hook for, the land rights and the utility costs. But just an example of what you can do. Wyoming's done some big projects to target salinity control. Colorado's done a lot of projects just for improving efficiency. You know, if we had a big enough project we wanted to tackle in North Dakota, this would probably be the way to go about it. Okay. Now we have a bunch of watershed projects going on right now through the Retention Authority and through water resource districts across the state. To date, most of the ones that are farthest along were solely targeted to flood control, and they've involved, for the most part, dry dams. These are always locally led planning processes. The public gets notified. We have a lot of public meetings, and it has been the case, I think, simply from physically where these dry dams are located. No one's expressed an interest in irrigating out of them, but we certainly could have combined an irrigation purpose with any of these projects. We do have a couple new planning efforts that are just starting up on Upper Turtle River and Crooked Creek in the Grand Forks and Sargent County areas. And I think both of those could conceivably involve irrigation. It's just a matter of the local folks who might be interested in expanding their irrigation acreage, getting involved and expressing that interest. Go ahead. And certainly our Upper Turtle River Dam 10 project, it would be the largest NRCS dam in the state if we were to go through and build it. That blue line kind of represents a potential permanent pool location, whereas the green line represents the potential flood pool. So that's sort of 10-day duration temporary flood pool. And I think through that planning process, you could see there's a fair amount of irrigation in that area, and there's additional irrigable lands that could be brought in under irrigation. So I think through that planning process, we'll be sort of weighing the potential for adding irrigation, the potential for even doing a permanent pool versus just a dry dam, the potential for recreation development, or the idea of simply augmenting current groundwater supplies with additional recharge to that Elk Valley aquifer. But these are the types of things we can do with PL 566, and I just wanted to, I guess, make everybody aware of that. So I will say PL 566, there's nothing easy about it. We hope to get them done in 2 years, but realistically, we're in the 3 to 4 year time period. There's a very large book about how we go about it. They involve a lot of public meetings, interagency meetings. Through the planning, we try to get to 30% engineering design, and we have to show from an economics perspective that it makes sense for the federal government to invest in the project. So for an irrigation project, we'd be looking at what value do these additional irrigated lands bring to the public versus the tax dollars that would be invested. So, and of course we have a whole pile of environmental type analyses that we've got to go through on the projects as well. Okay, but yeah, so in summary, I mean, I guess if you have an irrigation improvement project with conservation benefits, large or small, if you're interested in either technical or financial assistance, you know, come talk to us either at the local office level, folks like Erica or I that really like and pay attention to irrigation. The sooner you involve NRCS at some level in the planning process, whether EQIP or CSP or RCPP, the better your chance of having a successful project is. We're perfectly willing to work with you. We'd love to look at new technologies. Sometimes things like our cost schedules and our practice standards are set up for certain things, and they take a little while to catch up to innovations, but we are fully committed to keeping up with technology in North Dakota, and it may take us a year or two to get geared up, but we will definitely do it if it's a proven technology that will help natural resources. And then on the PL 566 side, I guess for sure, I guess contact me if you've got interested in a project. These things are large and take time to plan, but it's certainly available if you've got a great idea and you're ambitious enough to undertake it. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Christy and Erica. I guess we're kind of pushing the limit on the clock, so